Okay. So on the assumption that you can hear me, I'm just going to wait for confirmation. I am going to start today's talk. And the talk is entitled Mindfulness Meditation, What It Is and What is the Scientific Evidence. So first of all, welcome to all of you. Some of you I know are not first timers. Some of you have already been to my talks before. So welcome back to you. Those of you who are first timers, welcome to my talks. And I hope that you find these interesting. So I'll just do one final technical check, which happens on the phone. Yeah. Been told that the sound is a bit quiet. I don't know what I can do about that. I can try to speak more loudly. I hope that this is okay. I think I've got it as loud as I can get it. So unless Oscar tells me that I need to change it, I think I should be okay. Yeah, so I'm going to be sitting close. I just don't want to scare you with how I look after months in lockdown. But if you can put up with me like this, I guess we're going to have to go with this, okay? So I'm sitting close, virtually kissing you, and I'll speak more clearly. So let's get going. Mindfulness meditation, what is it and what is the scientific evidence? Before I start the talk, some housekeeping. Those of you who've been here before know the drill that I give this just to give you a sense of how things are going to work. There seems to be an issue with the sound. I'm just going to sort this out. I'm very sorry about this. There's always some technical issue or other. Settings. Oh, microphone. I hope that this has sorted out the problem that you might have been hearing. So the microphone, I hope that this is okay now. So apologies for that. I really hate technology. Oscar and Kim are letting me know. Okay, they said it's better now, so I think we're sorted. Yeah. Okay. So some housekeeping to start with. You're all watching this on Facebook, although some of you I know might be watching this directly through Eventbrite. Those who are on Facebook, you can send in your comments, questions, and of course your likes on Facebook. I will be taking questions at the end of the talk. The talk will be about 50 minutes or so, depending on how much I witter on. And I will take all the questions at the end. So do send in questions. You can send them in at any time. So hopefully I'll be able to answer as many questions as possible at the end. If you're a tweety type of person, then do tweet about this. My Twitter handle is @Ashok and my tag is the Brain Guy. My lovely team of students will put onto the Facebook chat all of our other social media handles, etc. And we'd really appreciate it if you told the world about us. Now, I know many of you are returners, which is really nice. Thank you for returning. Those of you who are not returners, and this is your first talk, first of all, a great welcome to you. Second is that this is series 4 of a series of talks that I've been giving since last year. And what we do is after the talk, we download the recording, we edit it, and then we upload it to YouTube. And this is my YouTube channel called Dr. Ashok Chansari Neuro Talk. I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about these the YouTube channels. But one thing I just want to point out is the little image on the bottom left-hand side. That image is of one of my lovely students, Francesco Innocenti, who has his own YouTube channel where he previews and reviews popular science books, and they're great for people who are coming into the field or people who just are interested in popular science. So I'd recommend looking at Francesco's channel as well. I'm really pleased to say that we seem to have a following from around the world. So I've tried to say welcome in as many languages as possible. And these are the countries that at least I think we're getting people tuning in from. If we're missing your country, then do let me know, because I love the color red and I want to splash it all over this map. So if you're in Greenland or Uzbekistan or Niger, then do let me know, because it'd be good to fill in this map. Okay, first and foremost is the thanks. I prefer getting the thanks out of the way, because these talks are possible because of the work of lots of people rather than just me. I'm just the monkey at the front of the show. There's a couple of wonderful people who've helped a lot. On the extreme left is Lofty Lawrence, who actually came up with the idea of my lockdown talks a year ago. I'll be mentioning that in a moment. So Lofty, thank you enormously. If it wasn't for Lofty, then we wouldn't be here, because Lofty is the one who suggested all these talks. And on the extreme right, we've got Pedro, who is a student at the university and who was remarkably helpful when I first did these talks. And then there are a number of really notable people who help out too. I'd like to point out the two young men at the top either side, Oscar on the left and Francesco on the right, because they've been giving me help either technically or in terms of content, and then all the other lovely people on here. So thank you to all of you, and I'm very grateful for all your help. As an overview, what I'm going to do is first of all tell you about this last year of talks, because this is a new thing for us, and I just wanted to show you how we've evolved. Then I want to tell you what mindfulness isn't, because that was partly the reason for doing this talk, because of the misconceptions that exist. Then I'll try to tell you what mindfulness is. Then a little bit about what areas mindfulness has helped in. And there are many, many, many. So I'm not going to be able to tell you all of them, but I'm just going to skate around and tell you a little bit about them. Then, given that I'm a brain nerd, I'm going to tell you a bit about what impact mindfulness has on the brain. And then I'm going to end with just some personal thoughts about how to find a course. Now, I need to emphasize that I'm not a mindfulness meditation teacher or any sort of guru or anything like that. I'm just someone who happens to have done it myself. I've done research on it that you'll find out about later on, but I don't have any training. So a lot of what you'll hear today is either my personal experiences or opinions or scientific evidence, but I'm not a mindfulness teacher. Okay, so today, just by happy coincidence, not even happy coincidence, by coincidence, happens to be a year since lockdown was announced a year ago on the 23rd of March, 2020. And in fact, that's kind of why I decided to give this first talk in series 4 today to mark this anniversary. Now, what happened is that in March last year, before lockdown, I was talking to the lovely Lofty Lawrence about giving a talk about the brain here near Brighton, where I live. And it was going to be in a venue in Brighton or in Worthing. And we were organizing where it would happen, how we would organize tickets, etc. And then lockdown was announced. And I thought, oh, crap. So I said to Lofty, well, that's it then, isn't it? Can't do it. And Lofty, being completely unfazable, just said, just do it online. And I thought, oh, okay then. Because I'd only just started giving lectures online because we had to with the university. So I thought, well, we'll give it a go. So we went online. It was really the blind leading the blind, and I'm really blind. I gave this talk on Zoom. We'd only just found out how to use Zoom. I advertised it online. I got over 300 people signing up, and we could only get 100 people into the room. I didn't really know how to use Zoom well in terms of muting everyone, etc. So it really was a hairy experience. And because of that, we've changed things since then. And so I gave one talk, and the talk was popular, and I realized even when I was writing it that there were at least 2 talks in it. So we expanded it to 2. Then as I was doing the talk, I realized that maybe there was another one, and we expanded into 10 talks in the first series. And then I was completely googie brained by the end of it, completely shattered in around June after I'd given 10 talks. But there was some lovely feedback, which made me think, okay, people kept asking for more talks. So in September, about October time, we did series 2 of the talks. And so in total, there was the 10 talks at the beginning in the first series, 4 talks in autumn, and those 14 talks are in a playlist, which is the Talks 2020 playlist that you see on the bottom left there. And then because that series was popular, we put on another set in January, and that series finished in sometime in February. And that series is now also a playlist, and that's the 21 series that's there in the middle. So those are the 2 playlists, the 2021 on the right and the 21 one on the left. And I've tackled lots of different areas. Some of those are areas that are close to my own expertise as a research neuropsychologist. Some of them are more general, broad understandings that I have of the field, and some of them were just me playing around. So aging and memory is a big area of my own research, as is face recognition disorders, the frontal lobes and their development and how they can get damaged, and the impact that has on all sorts of behavior. These are 3 areas of my research, and that leads to the 4th area, which is head injuries and criminality, which is an area that I've worked in a bit, and we've got a lovely project on at the moment to try to understand how head injuries during childhood may predispose someone to delinquent behavior as an adolescent, and then maybe result in the first crime. And we know that the rate of head injuries in prison populations is 8 times what we see in the general population. And also that when someone leaves prison, there's a 50% chance that they will be back in prison within a year. That's known as recidivism. And the story that we're trying to develop is whether the childhood head injuries are the ones that predispose someone to the first criminal act, and then drives that cycle of reoffending. And if we can intervene somehow to help, then we could actually reduce crime and, of course, help society. And there's other areas that I've worked in or talked about, such as strange and rare brain disorders, a new area, aphantasia, which we're working on, which is where people, about 2% of the population, aren't able to create a mental image when they close their eyes, or if they try to think of a sound or a taste, without the sensory input, they can't have that mental image. And that tells us something quite profound about our ability to imagine, or to create mental images at least, and what we take for granted, and the impact that that could have on not having that ability. But also the fact that it's not a disability. There are very successful people who've got aphantasia, so it's not as straightforward as people might think. I gave a talk on art in the brain, which is quite interesting because of the increasing amount of evidence for brain-related processes when we're looking at art or creating art. And then the last talk of the last series was about psychedelic drug-assisted therapy, because of huge growth in this area to deal with treatment-resistant disorders, with such as depression, anxiety, etc. So if you want to know about any of those, then please do go to my YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to the channel. It's free, and you'll get a notification whenever a new talk is uploaded. And also we upload any interviews that I do for the media or anything like that, so it's not just these online talks. So as well as evolving these talks, other things evolve, such as facial hair. So this is talk number one, talk number two, and then I kind of trimmed it down a bit. Then it wouldn't go, it just kept coming back. And then at this point, I just gave up, and I just, really just went for it. And here I'm doing my Robinson Crusoe, and here I'm really doing man with beard tugging at his beard. And it's been quite an interesting thing about lockdown, to just accept that things change and things grow, like our bellies or facial hair, etc. And yes, I'll get it cut sometime in April, but it was interesting. And thank you to Pedro for finding these 10 images. And these are all images from my talks that he downloaded from the videos of my talks. Okay, now to the issue at hand, which is mindfulness meditation. Now, some of you, or many of you, were kind enough to do that 15-minute thing or 15-second thing of just giving me one word that you associated with the word mindfulness or meditation. And this was just an early snap, but this is a word cloud. And I don't know how these really cool things are created, but they are, I think it's to do with the number of people who say a particular word, and that word becomes bigger in this word cloud. So this is when, say, 30 people had done it. And what we see is that word peace is coming out, calm is coming out, relaxation. But we also get some stuff like, well, Buddhism, interesting, faddish, and fad, esoteric, so ancient. So there are some conceptions, some of them might be misconceptions. So rather pleasingly, more and more people took it, and the latest count is 403. So what we see there is that some of those central words are still there. Peace is the middle one, the big one. We've got yoga coming through, awareness, calm, present. That's interesting because I'll talk about that. Relaxation, focus. And then there's some derogatory stuff, there's some hippie stuff, etc., etc. So this is interesting. And in a way, I did this because one of my genius friends, Liz Charlesley, she knows what I mean, she was talking to me by WhatsApp, and she was saying to me, I just can't do it. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, it doesn't work for me. And I said, what doesn't? She said, well, it's mindfulness. And I said, what do you mean? She said, the magic doesn't work for me. I said, it's not supposed to be magic. And I realized that, and I've had this so many times with people I've talked to about mindfulness, they have a very clear idea. They know what mindfulness is. And I'm thinking that's really weird, because those people who work in it don't know what it is, or are still trying to work it out. So that was the impetus behind creating this word cloud. So we can see that different people have got different ideas of what mindfulness is. So this is the start of our journey, as it were. Now, there are many different types of meditation, and that in itself causes part of the confusion. So this is just a visual of different meditations. There's visualization, sound healing, a guided meditation where someone is telling you what to do and what to think, mantra meditation where you're given a mantra and you have to keep repeating it over and over again, movement meditation, and yoga is a form of movement meditation. There's the Zen, Vipassana, etc. And there's overlaps between a lot of these, and mindfulness meditation happens to be one of these types. Now, it's rather interesting, the central figure there. The central figure there is of someone sitting in cross-legged and with their arms on their knees. Now, I do mindfulness meditation and I've never done that. I've never chanted. I've never burnt a joss stick. Never worn saffron robes when I've done mindfulness meditation. But the number of people, even people I love, who, as soon as I say meditation or mindfulness, they say, and I think, are you trying to become Hindu, or are you talking about meditation? And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about what this thing is. So I think it's useful to just look at the history of meditation. And this is an interesting timeline that I've adapted from the dailymeditation.com. So here's this timeline. It is not to scale. So those of you who are going to get your graph paper out and so that those numbers aren't, or those dots aren't to scale, thank you. Oh, today's even got squished. I'm sorry about that. But basically, this is a timeline from 3,000 years ago to today. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to read this writing. I'll read it out to you. So the exact date of meditation's origin isn't known, but scholars agree that meditation is approximately about 5,000 years old. And it did start in India. It's become an ancient Vedic tradition that came out of Hinduism. The Vedas, the earliest Vedas, so these are the Hindu holy books, the earliest ones are from about 1500 BCE, and these describe meditation. So we know that it was written down 1500 or so years ago. Actually, it's 3000 BCE, so it's actually it is 5,000 years ago, and then 1500 BC. Then, about 600, 500 BCE, meditation developed in Taoist China and Buddhist India. Now, if there's one thing that you take away from this talk, it's that Buddhism is a form of Hinduism. It grew out of Hinduism. It grew in India because Siddhartha was a Hindu prince who, just like Christ, was talking about a particular form of the religion he was born into. Christ was not trying to create a new religion. He was a Jew. The Buddha was a Hindu who was just talking about his particular form of Hinduism, but that turned into a religion with a different name. So Buddhism actually has its roots completely in India and in Hinduism. Then in about 400 to 100 BCE, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali were published, and these outline what are known as the 8 limbs of yoga. And during the same period, the Bhagavad Gita was written. Now, the Bhagavad Gita is it's a major piece of philosophy that is one of the central texts of Hinduism. And in it, the famous Lord Krishna appears, and it's a story about the victory of good over evil. So meditation is mentioned in the Yoga Sutras and in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's from, say, 400 or so BC. So meditation has been around for quite a while in India. So what happened next? Well, the 18th century, with the Europeans traveling to Asia and the Indies to basically plunder all its riches and all the spices, what happened is that some of the teachings from the East started coming back to the West with the sailors, etc., that were going on these voyages with the sailors. So slowly there's an awareness within Europe of these teachings, which came from a completely different tradition to the Abrahamic religions that were in Europe at the time. Then in the 1950s, the Vipassana movement started making meditation popular in the West, bringing it to millions. And it's probably four guys who were responsible for that. And then it's the Beatles. So there was that movement of the Beatles getting into Eastern philosophy, etc., and people beginning to travel there and bringing back ideas from that. Then in the 1960s, Hatha Yoga and Transcendental Meditation became popular in the West. Now you see the meditation is mentioned a number of times, but different flavors are coming through. The Vipassana, the Transcendental, Hatha Yoga, etc. Now, where we're concerned, the important thing is that in 1979, this man, Jon Kabat-Zinn, developed what's known as mindfulness-based stress reduction. Jon Kabat-Zinn, I think, is a microbiologist, and he's working in a hospital in Massachusetts, just as a microbiologist or something like that. But he had this kind of understanding that he was a Zen, he practiced Zen Buddhism, and he knew that it had very profound positive impacts on his life, and it helped him deal with some of the awful stuff that happens in life. And he happened to work in a place where awful stuff happened because he worked in a hospital, and there were, horrible things happening there because people were coming there with illnesses, etc. And he thought, well, I've been doing mindfulness meditation, Zen Buddhism for 20 years. I can't really tell people to go and learn 20 years worth of meditation to, improve their lives. So what he did was he developed this secular, so non-religious form of meditation, which is no chanting, no joss sticks, no saffron robes, etc. And it was a way of bringing some of the teachings or practices or skills from Zen Buddhism into a very Western world, stripped of all the religion, etc. And this is why when people think of meditation as Buddhism or Hinduism and chanting and religious, etc., they're really missing the point, because Jon Kabat-Zinn was not trying to do that. Now, I first came across mindfulness about 21 years ago. And at the time, I was going through a bit of a difficult time while living in the States. And this mindfulness thing was suggested to me. And it was beginning to grow at the time. And it was a different way of dealing with mental anguish and things like that. But from my memory, this mindfulness-based stress reduction had already been started up. And one of the early studies was looking not at mental health problems, but men who were having heart surgery. And one of the problems for people who've undergone heart surgery is that anytime after the successful heart surgery, they feel a tension in their chest, they think they're having another heart attack. And unfortunately, that thinking that they're going to have another heart attack makes them tense up. And that tensing up can actually make things worse for them. So what they did in the study was that they had a group of men who were about to undergo surgery. They taught one group the mindfulness meditation, and another group they didn't teach the mindfulness meditation. And then they looked at rates of relapse in the mindfulness group compared to the control group who didn't have the mindfulness training. So post-surgery, what was the rate of relapse? And what they found was that the rate of relapse of a recurrent heart episode was reduced in the group that had the mindfulness intervention. So that's quite profound, that this really physical thing, the heart, he was having, or this program was having an impact on something that was protecting people. And that's been the basis of such a massive amount of research into this area, because there's obviously something happening. So as a result of this, in the late 1990s, scientific interest started increasing. And in the States, at the end of the 90s, there was a slow growth in federally funded research on meditation. And what you see there is the dashed line for mindfulness meditation and the dotted one for transcendental meditation. And you see something rather interesting there, that overall there's been an increase in funding for research on meditation, but a lot of it is driven by mindfulness. And it's, I don't know what the reason is, but I think that maybe transcendental meditation does require more buying into a particular way of thinking, whereas mindfulness meditation doesn't quite involve that, but we can speculate on that later. So this is research. Now, thanks to lovely Francesca, I've got this graph, which is of the publications on meditation and mindfulness from the 2000s, is from 2000. And what you see is hardly anything in the year 2000. And now in 2019, we've got over 350 publications on mindfulness. So this is a growth area. Researchers are looking into it. What is it? Why does it work? How can you adapt it? What are the limits of it, etc. So this is obviously an important area if so much scientific work is being done on it. What I'd like to do now is to tackle some common misconceptions about mindfulness. So I'm going to call them mindless mythology. So myth number one, mindfulness is about banishing thoughts. It's not that at all. So lots of people say, no, but I can't empty my mind. You have to think about nothing, don't you? No, that's not what mindfulness involves. Mindfulness is not about trying to empty your mind. Mindfulness is about positive thinking. No, it's not. It's not a happy clappy, let's just think about positive things. That's not what it is. It's not for New Agers and hippies. It's got that rap, but it's not for them at all. Well, they can have it, but it's not just for them. Mindfulness will make all my problems go away. No, it doesn't. It really isn't a pill for taking your problems away. It's a tool, it's a skill for helping you with the problems that will happen. And that's one of the things that if you enter a mindfulness course, you have to accept that your problems aren't going to go away and the problems exist. No one has a perfect life. And what mindfulness does is actually just help you cope with some of this, but it gives you a really profound skill, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. Mindfulness is easier to achieve if you read books about it. Nope. And this is one of the things that I think is rather interesting, because there are some people who think that reading enough about something is going to teach them this thing. Well, I could read a lot about ballet. It's not going to make me a ballet dancer. And reading about mindfulness is not going to make you mindful. So there are lots of things that people think mindfulness is, and these are just some of them. There are more myths, but this idea that it's about banishing all thought, about positive thinking, etc., they're just not right. So what is mindfulness meditation? So here I'm just going to remind you that I'm not a mindfulness teacher. I'm just going to tell you my thought about mindfulness from the courses that I've done. Now, mindfulness is, it's used a lot for people who are dealing with stress, anxiety, depression. And not only that, but that is one of the big groups it's worked with. And one thing is that it's an acknowledgement of the fact that much mental anguish is regarding pain about things that have already happened before, or concerns about what hasn't yet happened. So it's about yesterday or tomorrow. Now, what this results in is not living in the present moment. So contemplating what you did wrong yesterday or worrying about that thing tomorrow means that right now is being missed. Now, this is one of the profound things that doing mindfulness is really important about, and this is the thing that people find difficult. Since the current moment is the only one that we're certain of, mindfulness meditation is about accepting this moment. So it's not about making this moment good. It's not about being happy. It's literally just accepting this moment. And if this moment is a bit yucky or it's a bit boring, it's just accepting that. Because a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to stop feeling what they're feeling. Now that mental and emotional work of trying to stop feeling what you're feeling actually just creates more anguish. And so it's really important that you know that mindfulness is about accepting the current moment. And I'll expand on that in a moment. Now, by accepting this current moment, whatever it is, there's less cartwheeling into the past of, oh, well, if only I hadn't said that, or only she hadn't done this, or he'd done this, or what if this happens? What if that person does that? If you don't go backwards or into the future, if you start accepting this current moment, then you're going to do less of that kind of pulling apart the things that have already happened, which you can't change, or the things that haven't happened, which haven't happened, and yet you're letting them rule your life. Now, mindfulness meditation involves learning to attend to this moment through a series of exercises. So there's lots of different exercises. There's a breathing exercise, which I'll tell you about in a moment. There's a body scan. There's an eating meditation, a walking one, a listening one. There could even be heavy metal. And this is thanks to my new friend, Scott MacArthur, that we were talking about last week. Now, at the beginning of most mindfulness courses, the people, and it's usually done in a group, the teacher asks people to hold out their hand and they're given a raisin, and they are told to chew that raisin without any instructions. And then after they've chewed that raisin, they're asked to introspect on it. What was the texture of the raisin? What did it taste like? What did it smell like? Etc., etc. Now, the reason for this is simply that most people just chew it and swallow it. And the reason for that is that most of us are actually not living in the present moment. We're not accepting this current moment. We're thinking about that thing already happened or the thing in the future. So this current moment, which is eating the raisin, is not being adhered to. And that means missing out a lot of life. Now, what you're trained to do is to live in this present moment, because ultimately, as a living sentient being, the only moment you know is right now, because my heart is pumping and it's giving me enough oxygen to go around my body, my brain, etc., to allow me to take the next breath. And that's all I know. I mean, I hope I'm not going to drop dead in the next, half an hour or something, but I don't know that for certain. But I do know that hopefully I'll take the next breath. And mindfulness anchors you to that. And by doing that, it slows down that future thinking or that past thing. So I'm going to give you an example. So the breathing exercise is quite straightforward. And as I said, I'm not a teacher, but I'll guide you through this. Now, so you can keep your eyes open. I'm going to close my eyes. But if I close my eyes, and rather than thinking about, oh my God, what are these people thinking about me? What did I do yesterday, etc. Rather than that, I'm just going to bring the focus of my attention to my breathing. And you can do wherever you want. It can be in the pit of your belly. It can be your sternum, because you can feel your chest going in and out. It can be your nostrils, because you can feel the air coming in and out. And you just get used to just feeling that, because most of us don't actually pay attention to our breathing. So I've got the air coming in and out. And all I'm doing is I'm just paying attention to it. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not thinking, God, I'm a great breather, or cool breath. I'm not giving it any judgment whatsoever. Now, at some point, my mind is going to start wandering, and it's going to think, God, are these people getting bored of me? Or I hope I can finish this talk in time. Now, when I do that, I've stopped thinking about my breath, because literally just thinking about that thought is taking me away from my breath. And what mindfulness teaches you during this course is that you start thinking about things, and you slowly just bring your attention back to where your focus is. So in my case, it's my sternum. And I continue breathing. Now, importantly, you're taught in mindfulness not to be judgmental. So you don't say, oh, you moron, you idiot, stop thinking about other things, concentrate. So it's not about concentration. And there's no value judgment. There's no, I'm really great at this, or I'm really rubbish at this, or whatever. You are literally breathing. I can hear my neighbors right now. And so my attention went that way because of hearing my neighbors. So my attention went there, and then I just bring it back to here, and I continue breathing. And that's all mindfulness is. And the body scan, the eating, etc., they're all expansions on this. Now, why would this make a difference? Well, the reason it makes a difference is because a lot of the things to do with stress, so with mental health problems, worry, sadness, etc., are not about the current state of being. They're about a concern about something that has already happened, which you can't change, or something that hasn't yet happened, which you don't know is going to happen. And by training this, coming back to the breath, and teaching this way of being present and just living in the present moment, it seems to protect us in some way. Now, we don't actually know the mechanisms, and this is a really important thing to be aware of. We know that it works. We're trying to work out why it works. We have some ideas about it, but we don't know for sure. I'm going to talk to you about some of those things in a moment. It's really important that you know that we don't necessarily know why it works, but we know that it works. And that's really important. And that's what research is looking at. Okay, so how could it be working? So let's go to the gym, kind of. Because I love my analogies. And if you're a gym person, you go and you work out, and you do your barbells, or lift your big weights, etc. Now, presumably, the reason you're doing that, I mean, it might be because you're narcissistic and you want big muscles, etc. But the main reason for that is to create fitness, and that fitness can be physical strength, or it can be aerobic stamina, such that you can run, etc. Such that if you need to carry a heavy box or crate or something like that, you have the physical strength to do that. So the gym is actually a training for the real world. Running on the treadmill isn't about running on the treadmill. Running on the treadmill is for when you need to be able to run or have stamina for things in your everyday world. And that's exactly what mindfulness is. So mindfulness, that, you're trying to concentrate on the current moment, etc., isn't about banishing the thoughts and trying to be positive, etc. It's getting you ready for the real world, because the real world unfortunately involves sadness. And if you can accept sadness and find a way to just do your breath, etc., what you will find, because this is what the research has done, which is what has shown rather, is that the sadness is actually easier to cope with. And we all have stress in our lives. If you can find a way to bring your breath back to here rather than that, oh my God, what am I going to do? And my colleague this, etc., then the stressful state that lots of people get into can be avoided. And guess what? The research shows that it can. And there's a huge growth in looking at childhood and adolescence, because I've just written a book chapter for a friend about problems that young people experience: sadness, anxiety, depression. And this is just because that adolescence is a bloody difficult time. I can talk about this later on, but it's to do with the way that the brain is set up and things like that. But most of us have been through an adolescence, and most of us have found that there were issues there. It wasn't easy. So what if we could help kids avoid it at some level? Well, there are all sorts of initiatives to teach mindfulness in schools, in classes, even primary schools, not just secondary schools. And the thing is that these initiatives are because research is showing that it helps. So this is work that has been done by someone I know, Darren Dunning, at this great group in Cambridge, run by Tim Dalglish. And this is a review that they did of the effects of mindfulness-based interventions on cognition and, importantly, mental health in children and adolescents. And what a meta-analysis is bringing together of all the different studies that have been done, and then actually analyzing the results of all of the studies together. So rather than looking at one study saying, okay, what is the pattern across these studies? And so what they did, and this is where it says in the methods, a systematic literature search of RCT, so these are randomized controlled trials, which is one of the gold standards in research, of mindfulness-based interventions. And they had 33 independent studies, which included 3,666 children and adolescents. So it was a fairly good review of 33 studies involving 3,500 kids. And their conclusions were that this meta-analysis reinforces the efficacy of using mindfulness-based interventions for improving the mental health and well-being of youth, as assessed using the gold standard RCT methodology. So this is just one study. There's plenty of studies out there. And because it's a relatively new area, I think it'll be amazing to follow these kids up 5-10 years from now to see whether they experience the kinds of difficulties that so many kids do. But my intuition would be that teaching these kids mindfulness meditation earlier in life is going to help them deal with some of the problems that come up later on in life. Now, that great singer of the 80s and 90s, Boy George, I think said that everyone should have therapy before they need it. And everyone does go through a bit of crap, because that's what life throws at most of us. And I think it's really interesting that with this mindfulness approach in schools, you can actually give children a skill that may help them deal with some of the crap that's going to come along. Now, mindfulness has also been used for stress management. I already told you about that early study on the men undergoing heart surgery. But I just looked at the NICE at the National Institute for Clinical Excellence in the UK. I looked at their web pages today and found so many different studies. So this is a mindfulness-based stress reduction as a stress management intervention for cancer care. And this is a systematic review where they looked at lots of different studies to look at the impact, and they found positive impact. So that's cancer. This one is about the effects of mindfulness on the psychological functioning of healthcare professionals, because healthcare professionals, as we've seen with the pandemic, are having to do bloody hard work. And this study shows a systematic review again of how it's been really useful for these people. And then recently, to 2020 again, we've got a study that's for social workers and the benefits of mindfulness, that it's their secret space. And we're finding this more and more. There are more and more work-based mindfulness programs which are helping people deal with the stresses of work. As I said, with depression and anxiety, NICE, as I said, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, actually recommends that instead of cognitive behavioral therapy, which tends to be the first frontline form of therapy for someone dealing with their first episode of depression, that anyone who's had, I think, 2 or more episodes, or maybe it's 3 or more episodes, that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is not going to suffice. That in fact, they should be doing what's called MBCT. So it's mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And this is a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, but bringing in the learnings from mindfulness. So this is a massive area, and it seems to be helping so many people. So, given that I'm a nerdy brain person, I want to talk about what's happening in the brain. Now, I want to start off with this photograph of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who some of you know is one of my favorite people in the whole world. And yes, he's Buddhist, but that doesn't mean that we have to say there's anything wrong with mindfulness. But the reason that I love this is because we've got a picture of the 14th Buddha of Compassion taking a picture of someone going into a brain scanner, because he's quite happy to accept that scientists can help us with this thing to do called happiness. So rather than it being a theological issue, he's willing to let neuroscientists get in on the game. Now, at this point, I'm just going to reveal my T-shirt. So this is my T-shirt, and this is a T-shirt I got from a concert that I went to about 15, 16 years ago, and it was a concert of sacred music, dance, music and dance that was done by the monks from the monastery that the Dalai Lama was trained in, and it's one of my favorite T-shirts. His Holiness is absolutely amazing. I love him, but that doesn't mean that mindfulness is Buddhism. So here's a picture of him taking a picture of someone going into a scanner to look at the brain. And one of the first studies in this area was by Lutz and colleagues, and this comes out of the work of Richard Davidson in Wisconsin, and he's one of the world leaders in this field. And what they did was to measure brain activation patterns using a technique called EEG in long-term Buddhist meditators who were actually, I think, part of the Dalai Lama's retinue, and people who don't meditate, but who were taught to meditate for a week. And what they found is significant differences between the long-term meditators and the people who'd only just been taught to meditate for a week. And so what this shows us that something's happening. Now, there's something different happening between the brains of these long-term Buddhist meditators and people who've just been taught, and we're just picking it up in terms of brain waves. So what's happening? But a good scientist would say, yeah, so whatever. What about their lifestyle? You know, these Buddhist monks, they don't have to worry about what clothes they're wearing. Just wear saffron robes. They don't have to worry about the stuff we have to worry about what do I look like today, and my clothes and stuff like that, and have people liked me on Facebook, their lifestyle is completely different. Their diet is different. Their environments that they live in are very different. So maybe it's just that being a Buddhist monk results in your brain being a bit different, and it's got nothing to do with meditation. So what scientists would do in that situation is say, okay, let's try to equate those other factors to see whether we see differences. And so Sarah Lazar did this wonderful study to follow up on that. And what she did is she matched her meditator group and the control group on gender, age, race, and years of education. So here we don't have a bunch of Tibetan monks who've lived in monasteries in India compared to Westerners who've had very different lifestyles. We have a group of meditators and a group of non-meditators, but apart from that one factor, they're the same in terms of gender, age, race, years of education. And very importantly, what she found was that the meditators had a thicker cortex, so parts of the brain, in the areas that are linked to attention, which is bringing information in, sensation, feeling, and perception, which is how we make sense of the world. So in this graph here in the bottom right, we've got age of the participants from 20 to 55 along the x-axis, and along the y-axis, along the side, we've got the thickness of this part of the brain. The red squares, therefore, for control, so non-meditators. And the line shows what we call the line of best fit, which is that on average, that is a line for your controls who don't meditate. And what you see is it's not good news. And this is because right now, while you're sitting here, even if you're enjoying my talk, or maybe because you're not enjoying my talk, your brain cells are dying. That's just happening. It's a fact of life. But what happens is that as we get older, and I just turned 54 a couple of weeks ago, so I'm not even on this graph. That thinning process of losing brain cells, that starts accelerating, and that's aging. But what we see with the meditators in the blue circles is a flat line. So what this suggests, we don't know for certain, but what this suggests is that mindfulness meditation or meditation is helping to protect against the natural aging of the brain. So this is really important. It's quite profound, and it suggests that it could be a protective mechanism against what's happening in life anyway. This work obviously needs to be replicated, but I think it's rather important. Now, the next thing is, what is it doing in terms of different areas of the brain and why? So this is an odd brain scan, and it's an idealized brain scan. And the way to think about it is that you're looking at someone's head and you're looking at them from the side, and they're looking down towards the right-hand corner. So the back of their head back here is the extreme left-hand corner at the bottom, and the front of their head here is the extreme right-hand side there. And what they've done is kind of cut away this area here to kind of show us these two areas that are really important. The green area is in what's known as the limbic system, and particularly an area called the amygdala, which is emotion central. So the amygdala is really, really, really important for our emotions. And I can talk about children, adolescents, etc., and the development of their brains later on, but this ties in. The purple area is known as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and it's this area here, and this is one of the control centers of the brain. And the reason that this is important is that in this study, they wanted to look at how these two areas are connected and how they speak to one another in meditators and non-meditators. And in this graph here, what they've done is looked at the links, the connections between the green area, the emotional center, and the purple area, the control centers. And they've got a way of looking at the strength of that link. And what they found is that in the mindfulness-based stress reduction group, the connection was much better, so a higher bar there than the people on the left-hand side, which was a health education program. So these were just people who were given a health education program, which had nothing to do with mindfulness. But people who were given a mindfulness course, the connection between the emotional centers and the control centers got stronger. Now, in this one, what they did is that they looked at people who were long-term meditators. So the MBSR people were people who hadn't meditated before, but were taken through this 8-week course that I'll meant to talk about in a moment. But they also had another group who were people who'd meditated for a long time. So these are people who'd been doing it for years and years. And the general thing that they found is that the activation in the amygdala, again, that emotional center, got lower to negative information as hours of practice increased. Now, don't worry if you don't understand that. The main thing is that people who'd practiced meditation for a long time, they seem to have lower functioning, which is a good thing, of the amygdala. If the amygdala is overactive, that's basically, it's like it's concerned. It's just constantly looking for threat. So an amygdala that's kind of quietened down is a good thing because it's not constantly primed for concern, for worry, for threat, etc. So a lower amygdala activation with longer hours is actually really good. It basically means that people are calmer. So this brings up a really interesting point, which is a standard thing in psychology, which is it a state or is it a trait? Now, by that, what I mean is that I could get you into a mindful state, as I tried to do earlier with my breathing little exercise, and I can keep you in that state by continuing to get you into that state by just saying, remember, bring your breath back, etc., etc. But does it actually result in long-term changes? And a long-term change is a trait. So can someone go from feeling calmer to becoming calmer? Becoming calmer is a trait. Feeling calmer is a state. And this is rather important. So there's this important distinction between an altered state, which is a temporary effect, and an altered trait, which is a long-term, long-lasting, enduring, or permanent impact. And this is a quote that Francesco gave me from Goleman and Davidson's book, The Science of Meditation. And they said an altered trait technically is the sustained beneficial qualities of thinking, feeling, and acting resulting from purposeful mind training and accompanied by lasting supporting changes in the brain. So this is after sustained practice, what happens is that you end up with these lasting changes. So you can have the state changing, so calm someone down. And I think a lot of athletes have kind of mindfulness visualizations before an event. So that's getting them into the state. But ultimately, if you keep doing it, it could turn into a trait. Right. So I just want to talk about what's happening in the body, because Davidson did this rather wonderful study that I told you about, where they looked at, or maybe I didn't, I can't remember. They gave people, one group, a mindfulness meditation program, another group, the control group, didn't have the mindfulness. And then at the end of it, what they did is that they gave everyone a flu vaccine. So the vaccine has got nothing to do with mindfulness. They just gave people a vaccine at the end of their 8-week thing. And we know what's happening at the moment. Everyone's getting vaccinated, hopefully. what they found is that the level of antibodies produced in the blood serum in the people who'd done the mindfulness meditation was significantly higher than the people who hadn't done the mindfulness. And when they correlated the level of antibodies, what they found out is that there was a direct correlation with activity in the brain. So what that suggests is that people who'd really engaged with the mindfulness, who, as we saw from the previous slides, their brain activation seemed to be changing, those people who'd kind of really gone for it, their antibody response seemed to be much higher. So what seems to be happening here is that it's helping the immune system. And this is because it's calming people down. Their calmer system means that their hormonal system, et cetera, that is constantly dealing with the crap around us and looking at threat-related stuff, et cetera, is not having to waste its energy on that. And therefore, it can do more work on against the vaccine, and therefore create better antibodies, and therefore prepare the body for an attack if the virus does hit. So I think this is a rather profound finding, that we have impacts all over, not just in the brain. So finally, I want to tell you about helping people with limb paralysis. And this sounds bonkers, but there's a reason for it. Now, strokes and various neurodegenerative diseases, such as sclerosis, they can lead to partial or complete motor paralysis. So the person has the limb there, but the message can't get from the brain to the limb. Now, if the sensory and cognitive functions are intact in terms of the feeling in the brain, then a brain-computer interface system can be used to improve the quality of life of such patients. And a brain-computer interface it's very science fiction-y, but it's a mind reader. So here is an example of a BCI, brain-computer interface. So this gentleman who's in a wheelchair has got some electrodes clamped or positioned around over the motor areas of his brain, which are these areas here. And the BCI is that gray box behind his wheelchair. And what that is doing is picking up the signals from the movement part of his brain, and it's sending those signals to that box to help control that wheelchair. And this is because we know where the signal for moving a joystick or moving your arm, for example, as you might for the controls on the wheelchair, that signal is there somewhere. But if the arms aren't working or the legs aren't working, then you can pick up that signal, feed it to that brain-computer interface, and that computer interface then can control the wheelchair. Now, the general method is that this message is picked up from a particular part of the brain. And if someone has got an artificial limb, what we'd like is if we can still make that limb work by sending a signal there. And a brain-computer interface, or the training that is involved, is getting the person to visualize the movement even if they don't have the limb. Now, this is complicated, so I won't go into details, but this is rather important because brain imaging research has shown that when someone executes a particular movement, such as moving your arm forward like this, or when they just imagine that movement, so imagine moving your arm like that, what you see is that there's very similar brain patterns. So what that means is that those areas here that the gentleman had the electrodes on, they're going to pick up those signals, because him imagining moving his arm or his leg is not that dissimilar to him actually moving the arm or the leg. So if we can find that signal, we can use it. And if we can understand that signal, we can use it to control the prosthetic device. So this brings us to the question, can EEG patterns be improved? Now, the variations of these EEG patterns, those signals, are greatly affected by the mental state of the user. Now, if you're really agitated, you can be trying to think of moving something, but because you're stressed about all sorts of things and you're hearing that music over there, etc., you've got lots of noise. And the brain-computer interface says, just shut up. I want the signal for the arm. So the signal for the arm is called this signal, and everything else is called the noise. And ultimately, the holy grail in this work is to improve the signal to noise ratio. So the classification accuracy of the BCI can be improved if the user's interest and attention is maintained, but degraded if the user has insufficient attention because they're bored or they're agitated or they're distracted. So this is a quote from Davidson and Lutz, which is that one of the interesting implications of the research on meditation and brain function is that meditation might help to reduce neural noise and so enhance signal to noise ratios in certain types of tasks. In contexts where brain-computer interfaces are being developed that are based upon electrical recordings of brain function, training in meditation may facilitate more rapid learning. This idea warrants systematic evaluation in the future. So basically what they were saying is that if meditation can help with that signal to noise ratio thing, then maybe it should be used to try to help people with these, using these devices. So guess what? I decided to do it. So what's happening here? We have a person who has an idea and they have the brain signal because they've got the idea of moving their arm. This is captured in this brain-computer interface, and then these neuroprosthetic devices can be used to move an arm or the wheelchair or whatever. And in research in this, what happens is the person gets feedback. How that feedback happens, I'm not going to go into. Now, if we get feedback, what can we do? If we give meditation to this person to try to improve that signal to noise ratio, we improve the signal. If we improve the signal, we improve the efficiency of that whole system, and then we might be helping that person to control their neuroprosthetic device. So taking Davidson and Lutz to their challenge, I helped design this study with biomedical engineers in Kuala Lumpur to look at whether we could use mindfulness meditation to improve brain-computer interface performance. We had 76 healthy volunteers, so this isn't with patients yet, who had no experience of formal practice in meditation or to play a musical instrument. This was important for the study. We had baseline testing where we looked at people on various abilities, and then we allocated them to 3 intervention groups. One group learned mindfulness meditation. Another group, we taught them a musical instrument. And the reason for this was that we wanted to see whether the impact of mindfulness meditation is simply because you're just getting people to concentrate. Is it concentration or is it to do with mindfulness? And then finally, a control, which is no intervention. So we wanted to see whether any sort of concentration intervention helps and whether meditation helps beyond the concentration control. And there were certain ways that we did this. So the design of the study was that we tested everyone a baseline before they started. Then we split them randomly into 3 groups. We did 3 months of this training, whether control, guitar, or meditation, and then we assessed them after 3 months. And these are our data that we published. We've got the meditation group, the guitar group, and the control group. And then there's a way we can look at the accuracy of performance in the BCI. This was baseline, so this is how everyone was at the starting point, and this is how they were 12 weeks later. And the important thing is that if you look at the guitar people and the control people, 12 weeks after we recruited them to the study, people's performance actually went down. They got worse. whereas our mindfulness group, their BCI accuracy increased. So their ability to control these cursors with their mind, so it was mind control that they were doing, got better following the meditation. So doing this may help people in terms of controlling neuroprosthetic devices in the future. So we were very happy about this. Okay, finally, I just very quickly want to skate through whether this is for everyone, because I'm very careful of trying to suggest that this is for everyone. It's not. Now, it's definitely not recommended for people with psychosis. There are reasons that they find that inner kind of going into oneself with the breathing, etc., and then the things that happen in an 8-week course, which is the standard thing that Jon Kabat-Zinn developed, those can actually be quite difficult for people with psychosis. And there'll be other groups as well, so one needs to be careful. And there are systematic reviews that have found that there are some groups for which there are adverse effects. And some people with depression and anxiety, their symptoms actually increase. And so for some courses, 8-week courses, they actually say that if someone is actually currently experiencing these difficulties, they shouldn't do the course, because it's actually, it might exacerbate their difficulties. So please note, this isn't something that everyone should go out and do right now. It's more a case of it can be really useful, but you have to also time it properly. So in terms of how to find a course, it's difficult to make one recommendation, but the 8-week course that was developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn and others seems to be the most rigorously developed and supported. Now, Bangor University in Wales, they have a centre for mindfulness, and I think they have lots of resources on how to find a good course. And they train the best people in the country. So if someone has been trained at Bangor, then you know that they're likely to be good. If people want to email me, I can find out for you, but you can find out from the Bangor resources. It's really important to think about your own expectations. So thinking that it's going to make your problems go away or make you happy, that is setting yourself up for failure, I'm afraid. You are told that this isn't going to make you happier. It makes you more able to cope with the difficulties. And what happened is that, weirdly, once you get to that point of acceptance, which is what coming back to the breath is about, etc., you actually find that your response to the same negative thing is dampened. So it doesn't take it away. It just means that you can get on with life. And then eventually you're able to just cope with the stuff. And that then frees you to actually move into other aspects of your life. It's really important to feel trust with the leader of the group. So just like if you're going to have someone drilling into your mouth when you go to the dentist, and you need to trust that person, with mindfulness, you need to have some kind of feeling that this person is okay. So I would always recommend that if it's possible, you go and talk to the person who's going to lead a course, because you'll get an intuitive feeling about what you think about this person. And each person brings their own thing as a teacher to a course. And when I did my course here in Brighton, the guy who taught me, called Tara Vajra, he was amazing. But if it had been someone else, maybe I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. So it's really important to feel that trust. And it doesn't have to be expensive. Now, I can't remember how much it cost me, but an 8-week course cost about £120. And so this isn't an expensive thing. Now, importantly, mindfulness is about trying to prevent the mental anguish coming back. So in a way, it's an investment in the future. So £120 is actually quite cheap for pushing away some of that rubbish. And sometimes more expensive might not be the best. And this is a lovely quote from Scott MacArthur, which is, he said that a few years ago, I spotted a paradox with regards to psychometrics. So this isn't to do with mindfulness, but I think it applies here. So this is to do with psychometric testing for jobs and Myers-Briggs and stuff like that. He said that generally the more expensive they are, the less likely they are to be reliable. The less likely they are to be reliable, reproducible, and backed by scientific research. So sometimes bigger is not always better. It might actually be better to do a course that's about £150 and that's it. You don't have to spend £1,000 on something. It's better to do a good course that is standardized than an expensive one that offers you the bells and whistles. But if it offers you the bells and whistles, it might be kind of setting you up for failure. So just be careful if you look for a course, but good luck. So as a summary, mindfulness is a new way of dealing with some aspects of mental well-being as well as with some physical difficulties. It is not what some stereotypes suggest it is, but there's a lot of scientific evidence for its efficacy. It can help with a lot of difficulties such as mental health problems, stress and chronic pain, and it even may be a protective skill for young people to deal with the growing pains of adolescence, and seems to have positive impacts on the immune system and maybe even protects against some of the signs of aging that we're all going to experience. So finally, as a wrap up, I just want to say that if you're interested in any of the research that my team does, then do get in touch with us, email us. Here are our different social media handles. So do get in touch with us. This is our email address, art.gold@gmail.com. Please include your name, age, gender, and any neurological condition if you suffer one, such as epilepsy or cognitive difficulty, or even strength. If you're amazing at something, we want to know about it, because we also study people who are great at things. And you can find out more about art, so that's our Shook's research team, by visiting our website. We do lots of research on memory, face recognition, the front of the brain, you name it, we're doing it. So do come along. Okay, right. Oh, that didn't work. So thank you. Those are my details. The next talk will be on the placebo effect, probably this time next week. And as has become tradition, people have asked me for a picture of my mummy. So here's a picture of my darling mummy on her 80th birthday, with me being a very proud son. So thank you very much. I know this has gone on a bit, but that was partly because of the review at the beginning. So thank you. I will now take a quick 5-minute break and then I will be back to answer questions. So do send in your questions. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm back, and I never drink on my own. It doesn't do it for me, but because I can feel your presence, I'm going to reward myself with the glass of red wine, which is good for the heart. Here goes. I've got some questions and I'm going to start answering them. And Lofty was very pleased that he is still included. And he also thinks that my beard, for those of you who are old enough, looked the full David Bellamy. Only people of a certain age will appreciate Lofty's comment, and I loved it, just like I love Lofty. Okay, I'm going to start taking some questions. So the first question is from Don Elwick, saying, referring to the history of meditation, what about the Franciscans? I'm not sure what you mean by that question, Don, whether you mean the Franciscans interacting with people in the East and bringing meditation back, or whether you're referring to the Franciscan form of meditation. If it's the latter, I'm certainly not suggesting that the Eastern inspired meditations are all of meditation. That's certainly not what I would want to suggest. I'm just saying that this is where mindfulness meditation came from, because it came out of what John Kabat-Zinn himself was doing in his own personal practice, and he developed mindfulness out of Zen Buddhism. So the roots of mindfulness meditation are traced back to an Eastern meditation that started off in India. But if that wasn't your question, then do text back in again. Janet Cawthorne, who is one of our super fans, she comes to lots of our talks, so we're always pleased to have Janet, says, do you think this is why knitting might be good for mental health? Actually, that's a good question, Janet, and I think it is the case, because the thing about the mindful, the body scan, the breathing exercise, etc., is about the current moment, and it's about effectively living right now. And what I've heard is that gardening can be really good as well, because you can't garden mindlessly. And similarly, with the knitting, I guess you can kind of go into autopilot, but you've got to be a bit careful. So I think that that's why knitting is probably good for mental health, because it's not allowing you to think about that stuff that's already happened, or that stuff that isn't yet happening. So I think that that's possibly why knitting is good, because I think what's happened with the mindfulness or the meditation practices is that they're just ways to try to come back here. And they came out of a religious tradition, but they were just about that keeping still rather than cartwheeling into the past or into the future. Right. So the next question is from Nessa. Nessa from Toronto. Hello, Nessa. She says, I find sitting by the river at my cottage, which is on a small rapids, cleanses my mind. It grounds me in the moment and time washes over me. Could this be a form of mindfulness meditation? And if so, could it confer the same benefits? Actually, Nessa, that's an interesting question. And yes, one of the meditations is a walking meditation where you do a half-hour walk, or you walk from your home to your work or whatever, and you're told to just pay attention to all the sounds and things like that that you hear and the things that you see. And the important point there is not being in autopilot. So the same thing here, like the knitting, you can't go into autopilot. There's a squirrel running along there. Oh my God, what's that squirrel got? And there's a dog over there, etc. And that present moment awareness is the important thing in mindfulness. And there are listening meditations where you just listen out to the sounds. And we usually just kind of shut them out. And what mindfulness is about just find a way to listen to those things. And it's almost an anchoring in the current moment. So you listening to the sounds of the water, etc., that is a form of mindfulness. So the thing about mindfulness, that it's not that it needs to be your breath. It's just that that's the easiest one to learn first. And then there's something called the body scan, where you just lie there and you feel the breath in different parts of your body coming in and out, and you just do in and out. And again, it's the same thing as mind will wander, and you bring it back. If you're able to sit there and just listen, watch the river without, oh damn, that thing that I've still got to do for work, etc., then you're being mindful. And so yes, it's the same thing. I think the thing would be that the mindfulness practice, it's a formal practice that you do every day for a certain amount of time, etc. And because of that routine of the breath or the listening or whatever, you're doing it for a certain amount of time. So you're building up your time. So it's kind of like flexing that muscle in the gym. So depending on how much time you spend at your cottage and how much you do it, etc., I think it could be that. So Anna Nation has asked, have you done much research into how mindfulness might prevent dementia? It's a really good question, Anna, and the answer is that No, we haven't done any research into this, but I think that it's an area for growth, because in my memory research, and in fact, could my team please share the link for the Forgetting Project at ValMT? Could one of you please share that online with everyone, because I want our current viewers to find out about that work and to do this. We're doing a big study looking at how to try to diagnose dementia much earlier than is currently possible. And so that's my memory work, but this mindfulness work is coming from a different direction. Whether it will prevent dementia, I'm not sure. And I don't think it will, because dementia is a complex disorder, and it's not just based in one area of the brain. It's a degenerative disorder which is eating away at different parts of the brain. If it was just the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, then exercises to try to strengthen that might help stave it off. But given that dementia, frontotemporal, Alzheimer's, vascular, etc., all of those are attacking quite a few different parts of the brain at different rates, to different amounts, etc., etc. I don't think mindfulness would be sufficient, because mindfulness is really about the connection between that emotional center and the control center, so the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So since dementias will be affecting other areas as well, I don't think it's going to prevent it, but it may kind of stave off at least some of the problems that the front of the brain is kind of dealing with it. So I think it's a bit of a mixed answer. And one of the problems here, and this is why I'd really appreciate it if anyone else who hasn't done my memory test so far, could do this, is that there's a chicken and egg issue there, that we need to work out what dementia is before we can prevent it. So we need to do more research on dementia, and this is what our study is about. So if Anna, you are able to take our memory test, which takes about 20 minutes to do, but you learn things and then we test you on it afterwards, and it's all online, I'd be really grateful. So team, if you could share this with our listeners, that'd be great. I hope that answered your question, Anna, but do write back in if you've got anything else to say. Julian asks, Julian Bishop, hello Julian. He's asked, is it likely to be taught in schools anytime soon? Really depends. It depends on local authorities, whether they've kind of become enlightened to this, etc. So I don't know what percentage of students or schools have bought into this. Maybe Kim, who took the question from Facebook, who is one of my team, and she's a deputy head of a primary school in London, she might have some sense of what percentage of schools have kind of started using it. But I think that given the evidence, and funnily enough, just as I went for my little break and to get the wine, I got a message from Darren Dunning, the guy who did that systematic review in schools, etc. So I'm going to be asking him. I haven't seen Darren for a couple of years, but I'm going to be asking him whether we could do some work together to look at mindfulness with kids, because I predict that if you teach kids at primary school about mindfulness, and this becomes part of a kind of thing that they do at school to teach them to come back to here when that thing is pissing them off or that thing is stressing them, etc., you're not going to take away the crap of adolescence and the growing pains of, that Adrian Molfeld, etc., but you are going to make it easier to deal with them. Now, we all know that even if you can't make a problem go away, by making it a bit smaller, you can actually deal with it, and it doesn't imprison you, and it releases you to do the other things in life. It's that kind of being caged by an issue that is the problem. As long as you can make a problem manageable, then you can do other things. And I think that is where we want to go with young children, because the things that are happening in the brain in development kind of predispose a young person to anxieties and stuff like that. So that stuff's going to happen anyway in modern society because of social comparison, and that person is taller and that person is more this than me, and I've seen this person on TikTok who's got better eyebrows than me or whatever. Because of all of that stuff, the social comparison that is often at the root of problems during adolescence, or at least one of the things, and the fact that there's this huge growth in use of social media, that's not going to go away. But if we can help children to just find a way not to let it freak them out, then I think that we're giving them a really important gift. So if anyone wants to help me with that, then I am very happy to help. Right, Darren's just sent me a message. I'm going to ask him to get onto this call. So I'm going to take the next question. Oscar, can you just send me the link again to the page? Because I think if I can send that to Darren, if Darren can join us, he might actually be able to answer some of these questions. So I'm just going to, actually, I found this. So I'm going to send it to him now. Right, so the next question is from Joanna Wright. Hello, Joanna. I think you're new to our talks, I think. How do you meditate with continual noise while meditating? E.g. neighbors banging, cars coming by the house, partner on the phone, dogs barking. This is what happens during my meditation. Really good question. Oh, Joanna, were you at Scott MacArthur's thing last week? Right. Okay. So the thing about mindfulness is that whilst there is that stereotype that you need to be in a completely quiet, zened out space, you don't need to be. Because you can still do mindfulness. And when I was doing my mindfulness, however many years ago, I was in London because I live in Brighton, I work in London, and I'd be in London a couple of days of the week. And I had to do my half-hour practice because during the training, you're supposed to do half-hour practice every day. And I would get onto the tube and I would have to sit on a crowded tube and I'd think, okay, I'll do my mindfulness. So I'd just sit there and I would do my body scan or I'd do my breathing exercise. And I could hear that person over there saying that, or that person being an idiot, or that phone, or whatever. I could hear all those things, but in a way, weirdly, that actually gives you more opportunity to be mindful. And so doing it in those kind of challenging circumstances actually flexes your muscle even more. Because being in nice, quiet, calm, serene situation is actually, that's good, and that's how you should start. But the thing is that you eventually want to be in a place where it's not ideal, but you can still be mindful. And this is what I was saying to Scott last week, and that's why we were joking about heavy metal, that you can be mindful to anything. As long as you're as long as you're staying in the present moment, you can be mindful. And I remember that someone that I did mindfulness for a little while, Patricia Collard, who used to be at University of East London. I don't know if she's still there. She actually started a small course of mindfulness for members of staff in our department. And one of the administrators said that it was amazing. She was on a tube and there were, some people just being irritating as people are during rush hour. And she said, just doing what Patricia had suggested about coming back to the breath rather than, why is that person being so irritating? I wish they'd shut up. I don't care about what they're going to have for dinner tonight or what they're telling their best mate on the phone, etc. She said that by just coming back to her breath, and just rather than really irritating me, really. And you know that thing that where people start cartwheeling and they can't stop thinking about something which has got nothing to do with them. She said she really felt the benefit of it. So I think that although you might not be in ideal circumstances because of the partner, the dog, the neighbors, etc., that might actually be quite a good test for it. As I said, it's not ideal, but it is possible to do it. Right. I'm waiting for more questions. In the meantime, I will enjoy my next gulp of wine. Come on, you people, send me some questions. So I'll just chat about the placebo effect while I'm waiting for more questions to come in. Could the team actually post the image of the next talks, because I'm going to be talking about the placebo effect, hopefully next week. And this is why a drug or something like that that has nothing in it can still result in a positive impact. I'm going to give a talk about sleep and why is sleep important, not for physical rest, but for your brain and cognition. So that's a really important area that I'll be talking about. And then the final one will be about addiction. So what is the neuropsychology of addiction? Why does addiction set in? And then once it's set in, what is the problem? So that's something that I'm going to deal with in one of my talks. Right, so I'm just going to see if there are any more questions. Lofty's asking me how much the placebo pills cost. Oh, Janet has asked a second question, which is, I was reading recently about mindfulness meditation being good for ADHD. It's very interesting, particularly in relation to preventing mind wandering. Do you think that this was potential as a treatment or therapy? In fact, there are studies about mindfulness and ADHD. Mindfulness has been shown to help. I'm just going to try to look for some information that I did have. Let me see. So this was 2017, a pilot trial of mindfulness meditation training for ADHD in adulthood, impact on core symptoms, executive functioning, and emotional dysregulation. Mindfulness meditation improves mood, quality of life, and attention in adults with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So there's quite a bit of work, and yes, it's mind wandering, because that's what attention is. Attention is, or one aspect of ADHD is that mind wandering, and mindfulness helps with anchoring it back. So it's very, very, very important for that. And as I said, there's been a study on adults with ADHD, and it seems to be helping. In fact, Darren says that he's just about to update that systematic review that he did. And that systematic review that he did had 33 studies in it. And that was published in 2019, but it was on the papers that he could find in 2017, I think. And he said that there must have been 30 new studies since it was published. So he's going to produce another systematic review. And you should remember that graph of it going upwards. So Julian, there'll be lots of stuff there. So if you want to know anything about it, Julian, then do let me know, because I'm in touch with Darren and he's part of this really amazing team. Okay, so Janet, I hope that answered the question. Sandra, oh, Sandra from Portugal. Hello, Sandra, we've missed you. She's asked, does this mean that cultures that have practiced meditation have lower stress than Westerners as a whole? That's actually a really interesting question. And I'd say yes. I don't have any evidence for it, but I'd say yes. I think that this is coming completely from a subjective perspective rather than an objective perspective, which is that what I see in whenever I'm in India is that there is a different way of being. It's bloody chaotic and it's mad, etc., etc., etc. But there is something about the way people are. There is something about the way people are more in the present moment. And I was actually watching a Rick Stein program about him cooking in India recently, just the other day. And he was saying there's something really quite different about being in India to many other countries, and people just got on with things. And I think that the um, the the way that the modern world is set up kind of predisposes to some of these things. Now I'm just going to go and try to find a book. One second. No, unfortunately, I've given it away to charity or to someone. But one of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's books that I think is quite profound, the most profound book you'll ever read, this is to everyone, is His Holiness's book, The Art of Happiness. If you haven't read it, buy it right now. Don't buy it through Amazon though, they're bastards. Buy it through a nice secondhand bookstore or an ethical bookstore. The Art of Happiness is the most profound document I've ever read in my life to read it. But his other book, which is Ancient Wisdom, Modern World, Thoughts for the New Millennium, it's something like that, is quite amazing because he basically says that although the developing world, or I don't know what the correct term is these days, or lower income countries or whatever, have got problems in the East, let's say, the developed world in the West has got its own problems. And um, a lot of this is to do with stress. And it's the way that modern societies, particularly in the West, are set up. And they're set up with a lot of that social comparison thing, a lot of what you're going to do in your retirement, what's your career going to be, how big is your house, is your, is your house bigger than your neighbor's house, etc., etc. And that whole thing about comparisons, etc. And he says that stress and stuff like that is built up in the West is something that needs to be addressed. And this is where the mindfulness practices or meditation practices come in. Now, I think that given that those practices or ways of thinking are quite embedded within Eastern Eastern philosophies and Eastern way of life, I think there is a profound difference. But I stand to be corrected, but I do think that there is a difference, certainly from my perspective. Right. I hope that answered your question, Sandra. And do come back if you feel like it. So Oscar, the lovely Oscar, who's my IT manager, as it were, he suffers from ADHD, and he says my personal view is yes, yes, yes. It also helps train and calm down ADHD in his personal experience. So I think that what we have with something like ADHD, I don't know it well, but I know it somewhat, is that effectively ADHD is this umbrella term for lots of different stuff. Now, one of those things is attention just going. Now, if mindfulness is for a person who is neurotypical, who doesn't have mind wandering, well, who doesn't have a diagnosis of anything, but we still have mind wandering, don't we? my mind wanders into, what's the neighbor doing, or what are other researchers in this field doing, and why is my work not good enough? All that, that's mind wandering. So we all experience it. And someone with ADHD, for that particular thing, mind wandering, they're just at a higher level of it. And remember, in my previous talks, I've talked about that bell-shaped curve, and that we're all part of that same umbrella, or that same bell-shaped curve. So all we've got there is that someone with ADHD on that dimension of mind wandering, they're just much higher. So given that mindfulness can help us who are neurotypical, let's say, with mind wandering, then it's definitely going to help someone with ADHD. It's not going to get rid of everything else, but with any syndrome, that's what ADHD, it's a syndrome, it's a collection of different difficulties, then at least with those ones that are to do with mind wandering, it's going to help. And that's the thing about what you see with the research on mindfulness, that it's not about trying to cure something, it's helping in certain areas where that attention and anxiety coalesce into a behavior. So taking you back to the very initial study by John Kabat-Zinn with the men who were undergoing who were having the heart surgery, what you've got there is that combination. You've got the threat of another heart attack because they've already had a heart attack. They're going to have elective surgery to try to reduce the chances of it happening again. But if they feel a tension in their chest, then that is going to be interpreted by the amygdala as a threat to life. And so you've got the same thing there, that you've got an emotional response, and that emotional response or that emotional feeling results in the panic, etc., etc. So what we see there is that it's not that mindfulness cures heart problems, it's just helping with that system of threat, emotions, and control. And what we have with ADHD is that there might not be an emotional component to it, but there is the mind wandering component. So I think definitely it would help. Nessa asked, forest bathing, being in nature, is this a form of mindfulness meditation? Does it have the same benefits? I have heard of forest bathing. I've seen one video of it, but I don't really know it, Nessa. I think that it's probably elements of it, but I don't think that it would be the full thing. Now, one of the important things to think about here is that what you want is your gym to be something that you can transport anywhere. So in relation to Joanna's question about the neighbors, the dog, the partner, etc., etc., if someone has taught her that you can only be mindful if you've got complete silence, then Joanna's just not going to be able to use mindfulness meditation at home, because the dog's yapping, the partner is asking this thing, the neighbors are playing loud music, etc. My former colleague Sue, she would have been really pissed off on that tube if those people continue talking. But if that mindfulness gym, as it were, my analogy, is a gym that you've got in your head and you can use wherever you want, then you can use it in any situation. Now, the thing with something like forest bathing is that you need to be in the gym of the forest, presumably, because unless you're in that forest, you can't do the forest bathing and all that stuff with nature. And I think that that's the difference. That mindfulness is a skill that's in here, and it's completely divorced from your outer experience or your physical settings. And I think that that's why it's profoundly important, that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, etc., etc., it can be used. Because the forest bathing, I'm not going to make a comment about it, but not everyone has access to a forest. but everyone has access to their breath and their body for a body scan, and everyone eats. And so teaching these practices that are grounded in your daily experience, I think, are really important, because then it means that when you strip away everything else that you've got, you know, all of this stuff behind me, I've still got my breath. So I think that there is a difference there. Okay, right. I'll wait for another question to come in. I'm always hoping that Graham Norton or someone like that tunes in and wants to ask a question, because it'd be nice if someone like that thought, oh, I'm going to ask him a question. Or Jeremy Vine, maybe. For those of you who know, I got interviewed by Jeremy Vine a couple of weeks ago, and he seemed to like what I was saying, but that was about face recognition, you know. I wonder if Brian's here. Brian Power, if you're here, send a hello to through the chat to my team. So I'm just going to ask the team whether there are many people still watching the talk. If they are, then I can continue. I think Lofty wants to ask me more question. Lofty's being naughty and asking me naughty questions to make me laugh, and he knows that that happens really easily. Okay, so Andrea and Kim are telling me that there aren't any more questions. I'll just stay on here for a few more minutes. If Andrea, Kim, Lofty, anyone wants to ask me a question, we can just turn this into like a Wednesday evening thing for us lot, where we just chat via face. What we're doing here is Zoom onto Facebook onto WhatsApp. So we can do this kind of 3-platform conversation where you can ask me questions. We just need Terry here, don't we, people? I'm finishing off this Primitiva that I bought the other day. It's okay. It's from Morrison's. I wasn't expecting much, to be honest. But it's not been too bad. If anyone wants to buy me a thank you for this, for giving this talk, then a bottle of Primitivo will never be turned down. Oh, there's a question. Oh my God. Oh, I can't wait. Explain how the technology. Lofty wants me to explain how the technology works. Right. So I Zoom, and then Oscar has worked out this wormhole that streams directly from Zoom onto Facebook, and then Facebook sets up this screen, which is the live stream, or at least that's how I think it works. So someone has asked, could you transport the forest bathing experience into your imagination as a form of meditation? Interesting question. I'm not so sure, because I don't think that that's mindful then. I don't think that thinking about the forest over there is being mindful, because you're not in the present moment. It might have been Nessa, Kim, if it's the forest bathing one, but I might be wrong there. Yeah, I don't think thinking about yourself being bathed in the forest, or whatever forest bathing is, would be a form of mindfulness, because that's escapism, which is different. Mindfulness is about right now. So it's like, that's okay. So just being able to experience that wine right now, rather than gulping it and looking for the answer on the WhatsApp thing, that is mindfulness. Being with that wine as I gulp it. So forest bathing or imagining it is not mindful. And that question was sent in by Adela Austin, who I think is a new entrant. So So I think Adela Austin, if you're new, then welcome. I hope you enjoyed this, and do my memory test, please. Sandra's asked, have I heard of Wim Hof breathing? No, I have not, I'm afraid. You'll have to tell us about it or text it into there, but I haven't heard of it, I'm afraid. Anyone else like Primitiva? They're from Puglia, it's southern Italy. My darling friend Jane and I, we're doing an Italian wine tasting and we're learning about them. So if anyone knows anything about Primitivas, do let me know. Okay. The Wim, I still don't know what the Wim Hof method is, I'm afraid. So I'm drawing a blank on that, I'm afraid. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, given that I've been talking for over 2 hours now, I might call it a day. But I can keep chatting because there's a whole glass of wine here that I'm happy to nurse while taking any questions. I think it looks like we're done with questions. Kim is typing something in. So those of you who are still here, even if you haven't got a question, it'd be nice to just, before you leave, just give us your thoughts about what you thought about the talk. We will be sending out a survey at some point about what you thought about the talks, but do give us your thoughts on the talks, on this talk in this chat, because I'm always trying to develop these talks further. Okay, there aren't any more questions, so I think that means that I can shut up. Thank you very much for your company this evening. I hope that you found it enjoyable. I hope the fact that it went on a bit longer than expected wasn't a bad thing. It is quite a massive topic to try to deal with, so I hope that I did it justice. And as with all of my talks and any of my research, if you found anything in it that you want to know more about, then do feel free to email me at a.chansari@gul.ac.uk. So thank you very much. Good night, and hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye.